Hyvää iltaa, hyvät katsojat, ja tervetuloa jälleen Israelin asioiden äärelle Israel-studioon. Tänään esitämme haastattelun, jossa tapasimme NGO Monitor-nimisen järjestön, tai se pitäisi kai lausua NGO Monitor, israelilainen järjestö, joka tutkii ulkomailta tulevia rahavirtoja, jotka kohdistuvat Israelin ja palestiinalaisten konfliktia siinä operoiviin kansalaisjärjestöihin. Ja itse asiassa mehän jo tässä loppukeväästä esitimme NGO Monitor-järjestön vanhemman tutkijan Sean Sachsin haastattelun, jossa hän kertoi nimenomaan Suomeen liittyen, että minkälaisia ongelmia suomalaiseen rahoitukseen liittyy, jota muun muassa ulkoministeriö ja kirkon ulkomaanapu lähettävät kansalaisjärjestöille, jotka pääasiassa vastustavat ja kiusaavat Israelia. Ja tästä sitten jatkoimme keskustelua NGO Monitorin varatoimitusjohtajan Olga Deutschin kanssa Jerusalemissa toukokuun viimeisellä viikolla.
Okay.
Olga Deutsch, thank you for inviting us to NGO Monitor.
Thank you for coming to visit us in Jerusalem. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. And just recently we had one of your senior researchers, Sean Sachs, in the same program. We had a bit different background in our studio, but it's good to be in Jerusalem.
The scenery in the Middle East is always a little different than in Finland.
Right. So your position here is vice president.
Yes, that is true. I have been with NGO Monitor. It's going to be 10 years now in September. And yes, I serve as the vice president and am very proud to help lead an 18-people organization right now that is active globally.
So what's the focus of NGO Monitor?
So we are an Israel-based research organization, and before October the 7th, it would have probably taken me 5 minutes to explain exactly what we do, because it was so reserved for those who are engaged in the political conversation and experts on politics and international affairs. But after October the 7th, after the Hamas pogrom, right, the biggest one since the Holocaust against Jews in Israel, it boils down to a simple liner, and that is, we defend Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state within the human rights space. And I'll explain. There are many ways in which the young Jewish state is being attacked, and many of them are physical, but there are also ongoing political attacks. We call it political warfare against the state of Israel, and weirdly, most of them are done in the name of human rights or basically abusing the mandate of human rights. So we look into the activities of human rights and humanitarian non-governmental organizations that are active within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what they do is, instead of promoting human rights and serving their mandate, they promote anti-Semitism, they have ties to terror organizations, they basically attack the very legitimacy of the Jewish people to have a state today. And in that sense, we refer, and when I say we, I mean all the Israelis, we refer to this political warfare as the eighth front, because it is as existential as the physical fronts coming from, Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas, and Iran, and so on.
Okay. After Sean Sachs' interview, I received some emails and phone calls telling that, this NGO Monitor just repeats the Netanyahu government message.
Well, I don't know if that is the case. I don't consult with any one government. We are a non-partisan research organization, that is also completely privately funded. So we, as a matter of principle, do not take any governmental funding, including from the State of Israel. But if the Netanyahu or any one prime minister's line is to defend our right to exist, then I guess that would be a compliment. But I will raise you on that. All our research is based on publicly available information, or we call it open source information. Now, that is, to my mind, in my book, is just a fancy word for Googling. Now we have a methodology, our experts know better and quicker where to find information, how to cross-reference different sources, but at the end of the day, it is Googling, because it's all publicly available there. So if anyone who has a claim against our research would like to have a conversation, a debate on our reports, then I challenge them to do that, because most of our reports just lead to the original sources of the organizations or the donor governments that we mention in the reports. And if a government supports a group that says, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, which is basically a call to destroy the state of Israel, or, supports an organization that will say Palestinian resistance in all its forms is our right, which basically says applying terror against Israelis is legitimate, then I think they have an issue and not me in proving that our research is serious.
Understood. And that was a good answer for a good question. Let's go to private issues. Olga Deutsch. Are you a Deutsch person from Germany?
Well, I do speak German, if that is the question. I did live and work in Germany for 4 years. My background is in business, so I worked in a consulting company when I was much younger. But no, I am originally from Serbia, and Deutsch is my husband's family name. We're talking about a Jewish family that has German origins. At some point, originated from Germany, moved to Transylvania, the border between today's Hungary and Romania. And then back through Germany, moved to Israel in the early 30s, just before the Second World War. But yeah, my maiden name is actually much funnier, and it is Israel.
Wow.
Yeah. It is a full circle when I met. Yes, it is a full circle when I met my husband. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. How did you end up in this world of researching? So,
when I was younger, and still living in Europe, because I moved to Israel 16 years ago. One of the positions I held was actually living in Brussels. I used to serve as the chairwoman of the European Union of Jewish Students, which is an umbrella organization of 36 national Jewish student bodies. The mandate was basically to give a political voice to the young Jews in Europe, and the mandate was far beyond the borders of the EU. So we had members from Ukraine and Russia and Moldova and Serbia, obviously. Part of it was actually fighting anti-Semitism and giving a voice to the young Jews. And when are we feeling discrimination? What constitutes anti-Semitism? So that's how I got involved with the political aspects of being Jewish in Europe. And when I moved to Israel, I first thought that I would be fine going back to business. So I spent the first 7 years in the business sector. But I felt two things. I felt that there was an underrepresentation of why Europe matters in Israel. Most of the Israelis, politically, but not only, culturally as well, are more geared towards the U.S. Being the biggest ally. But I think that Europe is underestimated. EU is Israel's biggest trade partner. Culturally and geographically, Israel is much closer to Europe than to anything else. A significant portion of Israeli Jews originate from Europe, speak European languages, and so on. So I figured that I have something to contribute with my expertise and understanding of Europe. But probably more importantly, I just felt that that's where my heart is in defending Zionism, defending our right for self-determination. To me, the existence of the State of Israel is the ultimate expression of Judaism today. Jewish religion is not just a religion, and I know that there are many theological discussions also. Is it a theology, so engaging with rabbis, is it just an interfaith dialogue issue, or is it a political movement, right? And to me, these two are inseparable, because when we pray, in Judaism, we pray towards Jerusalem 3 times a day. When we celebrate our religious holidays, most of them evolve around the geography, around this piece of land and the story that is attached to this piece of land. So defending our right to be here in a democratic state is my ultimate expression of my Judaism and my Zionism. So I wanted to make it a full-time job and not just a hobby.
Okay. I know about you and about NGO Monitor, especially what is related to Finland. And we've been able to have, during recent years, many visits from here to Finland. We've been organizing different meetings with politicians and other leaders, explaining what's going on in Finland. But in largest scope, what's going on in Europe from your perspective at the moment?
So it's not a simple question, and there's no black or white answer to that. Let me start with stating the official report of the Israeli government about the level of anti-Semitism in Europe in 2024. They say that globally, and that includes Europe, there was a 340% surge in anti-Semitism in 2024. And the numbers are pretty much the same for 2023. There is an incredible increase since October the 7th. And I think even for European standards, and the Americans always laugh about us Europeans, they will always say to me, well, you guys are used to living with a certain level of anti-Semitism as a pre-given. But I think, yeah, which is a sad thing to say, but I think since October the 7th, we have seen, even for European standards, unprecedented levels of Jew hatred, violence, and political antagonism, right, and anti-Semitism in Europe.
Can you name some countries?
Of course, and I'll give you the toughest example. You know, I could speak about Ireland, which is just anti-Semitic. The government there is super, and you cannot even call it critical of Israel. Like, they are just so biased that a lot of the policies will, borderline be anti-Semitic. We could talk about Spain, whose prime minister just last week, accused Israel of genocide, which is, I mean, it doesn't even warrant a serious argument. So many have flirted with the idea that Israel is an apartheid and so on. But I want to actually talk about Germany. It is probably the most important European state in many ways, and most definitely for Israel. And we just marked 60 years of the diplomatic relations between Germany and Israel, so it's very symbolic as well. On one hand, the same report by the Israeli government says that there was an 80% surge in anti-Semitism in Germany in 2024, which is huge, right? And they said that 70% of these attacks and incidents were Israel-related, which explains the nature of anti-Semitic attacks.
Is it coming from the right or left?
So I think that most of it nowadays is coming from the left, and it is being cushioned and mantled as criticism of the State of Israel. A lot of it is staged as advocating for the Palestinian people, but most of it is just hatred against Jews and attacking Jews. And, you know, you, Risto, are representative of the Finnish government to the IHRA, to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, right? And
not directly the government,
but yes.
Yeah, we're working together.
And you yourself are an expert on anti-Semitism, so you will appreciate what I have to say and the importance of the IHRA working definition on anti-Semitism, that we don't have a challenge in addressing the anti-Semitism coming from the far right. There is anti-Semitism coming from the far right, but we know how to identify it, we know how to call it by its name, label it, and the legal system knows how to sanction it, persecute it. When it comes to the anti-Semitism coming from the left, the system doesn't know how to deal with it. And, you know, when...
It's more civilized.
It's more civilized, and it's more connected to Israel. And then it's much easier to package it as criticism.
Yeah.
You know, when Finnish Jews are accused of being more loyal to Israel than to Finland, that is bona fide anti-Semitism. When when Israel is judged by double standards that no other country has to uphold to, then most people, because they're not experts, will say, well, it's just criticism of the modern policies of the State of Israel. But more often than not, it is actually anti-Semitism. But again, so you have this country, Germany, which on one hand is the most strategic partner in Europe of the State of Israel. Since October the 7th has been the most vocal European support of Israel, sent multiple delegations to Israel. It is the only country in Europe that, you know, says that BDS is illegal in Germany, that just in November passed a resolution that says anyone who denies Israel's right to exist will not get any German governmental support, financial or other, right? That says in the coalition agreement of each government that Israel's right to exist and defend itself is Germany's raison d'etre, and yet you have an 80% surge in anti-Semitism. And I think it's a perfect example of the complexity of talking about the situation when it comes to Jewish communities and Israel in Europe. You have the EU that will say the same things on paper, but then will review EU's association agreement with Israel just last week over the humanitarian aid issue. While a month ago, they held a meeting with the Palestinian Authority in Brussels, and they committed 1.6 billion euros in funding to PA, no conditions attached. So there is this complexity of like, yes, we want to fight anti-Semitism, but when it's about Israel, then we are much critical. There's actually an interesting book written by an American author, Dana Horn, titled, and I think when I tell you the title, you'll understand where I'm going to with it, that says, "People love dead Jews, live Jews less so," meaning we love to commemorate Holocaust.
Yeah, romanticize it.
Exactly, and also talk about the Judeo-Christian heritage of the continent and how we must not forget what happened during the Second World War, but we struggle still to translate that into modern day, reality.
Yeah, let's go back to Germany. About a week ago, when there was a foreign ministers meeting in Brussels, and there was this motion to open the association agreement between the EU and Israel, and its Article 2, which relates to human rights. Germany was one of the nations who voted against the move.
Exactly.
But just a few days ago, new Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and I was highly surprised by what he said, that we cannot accept anymore what Israel is doing.
And again, you're touching the core of the challenge. I think there is a discrepancy, like a gap between the images coming out of Gaza and how they're being interpreted and how they're being reported on. You know, everyone will show the images of hungry children, but they will not show the protests by Gazans against Hamas. And to my mind, these should be given the center stage. At the end of the day, it's not Israel that is besieging Gaza. Israel is still defending itself. Hamas still has a strong foothold, strong enough inside of certain parts of Gaza. I think the people of Gaza are the, you know, beyond the 58 Israeli hostages that are being still held by Hamas, the people, the civilians of Gaza are the biggest hostages of this terrorist entity, right? And we have, after October the 7th, there was tremendous support for Israel because no one could discard the gravity of the atrocities that took place. But pretty quickly, very quickly, that sort of evaporated and turned. And you know, when I'm brought into the interviews on media around Europe, they don't even mention October the 7th when they talk about the war. And I think to expect from an average European citizen to know every detail in the history and to remember what caused this war, you know, that would be an inflated expectation. And I think that all politics is local politics at the end of the day. So to my mind, the German chancellor saying that is also pleasing parts of the coalition. The CDU is one party, but the other one is SPD, which tends to be historically more critical and more left-leaning, right? So I think he was pleasing his base, and I think that modern politics is all about that.
But I've never heard such statements from the former Chancellor Scholz. And you said that the SPD was more critical, but I hardly ever heard anything very critical from the previous leader.
Because there was less need, you know. We are now after October the 7th. Last year, it was all about supporting Israel, visibly, symbolically. Because let me, you know, I'm going to go back and forth on Germany. That's why I chose it as an example. You know, while Scholz himself came a few times, Annabella Baerbock came here a few times. I think there were, in 2024, 7 official visits from Germany, which is unparalleled, right? But at the same time, the arms export from Germany to Israel went down significantly. So you can always, you know, you have to look at the picture as a whole. When you talk about support, Germany was the first organization to ban Samidun. Samidun is a PFLP-affiliated organization. PFLP is a Palestinian terrorist organization that was mobilizing and radicalizing the streets of Berlin and the rest of the city. So they were the first ones to outlaw them in Germany. So there's always this dichotomy, right? Like, and it's a plus and minus. But this year, as we distant ourselves from just saying, you know, a politician having to say October the 7th was horrible, now the political discourse has become, you know, Trump comes into the picture, also takes the leadership role, and sort of leaves a vacuum for Europeans and to soul search how do they populate that, which also explains why Brussels shifted more towards Ramallah, because that was the only way for Brussels. The US and Israel and the Arab states that were parties to the conversations, they pretty much marginalized EU. And Brussels' only option was to turn in the direction of the PEA to maintain relevance around the table. But I think in Germany's case, given the atmosphere right now, and particularly since last week, where you have UK, Canada, and France, you know, condemning Israel and calling for international sanctions, and on the backdrop of that, the EU Foreign Council reviewing the association agreement, I think that Chancellor Merz had to issue a slightly stronger statement to come across as balanced. Okay. I don't think that Germany is revising their alliance to Israel, but I think it has to wage it and contextualize it.
So how do you see the axis of Germany and France today? What is the role President Macron is playing here? Because he seems to be the key pro-Palestinian actor in Europe at the moment.
Well, I'm not an Israeli official, so I can allow myself to say things more bluntly. I don't really think France plays a significant role in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and more broadly in the context of whatever will be the new deal, the new geopolitical arrangement in the Middle East.
But he tries.
He tries
hard.
to. But my 10 cents would be that he is more making a statement for a significant Muslim population in his own country. Let's not forget that France also has a historical relationship with Lebanon and a significant population in Paris and in France. And I think taking a stronger stand on that is more to serve the local politics than to try to be on a... I don't see how they're a player. I think that Brussels, obviously, and let's not forget, money talks. EU is the single largest donor of aid globally, but the same is the case when it comes to Palestinians and the conflict here. And EU is single largest PA's donor. So that on its own buys them a seat around the table. Germany, but EU is a transnational entity. Germany is the second largest single donor, and that dictates the relevance. When it comes to France, it's not really the case.
Okay, so donations from the EU and Germany, much of them goes to Area C in the Palestinian territories, or Judea and Samaria. So how do you see that flow of money to the area which should be under Israeli control? And it seems that with the European money, there are a lot of action, construction, etc., that are against the Oslo Accords.
So your answer sort of also already, your question already answers half of the...
You know more about it. I only know about the headline.
I'll put it this way. Aid on its own is a wonderful thing. I come from Serbia, former Yugoslavia, after the Balkan Wars. Without the international community's aid, the country wouldn't have looked the way it looks now, and it wouldn't have many of the democratic structures and the civil society and so on. But there's a difference between sending aid and helping Palestinians in Area C build and live and whatever, and using aid and instrumentalizing it for political purposes. And this is usually the problem that the State of Israel has with this kind of aid. When most of the funding goes to political advocacy projects and not really humanitarian projects, then it begs the question, why would a country that has thriving diplomatic relations with Israel not voice any of their political issues through diplomatic channels, right, between Helsinki and Jerusalem, rather do that through funding bogus politicized projects? Let me give you a figure to attach to that in the context of Gaza. The United Nations asked for the last quarter of 2023, which is exactly the 3 months after October the 7th, in an emergency appeal, $1.6 billion in emergency humanitarian aid for Gaza. They stated 3 objectives that they would want to address with it. The third one was political advocacy, meaning it's not food, it's not medication, it's not tents, right, to address a humanitarian crisis. It is actually political advocacy. And most of the money that is earmarked as political advocacy actually goes to Palestinian NGOs who then file submissions against Israel at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, or International Court of Justice when South Africa accused it, or the United Nations, and so on and so on.
Olga Deutsch, Vice President of NGO Monitor. Our time is up. Thank you so much for receiving Israel Studio here in your offices, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you so much for having me, and we look forward to having you here again.
I'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Niin, hyvät katsojat, kiitos jälleen seurasta. Ja jos koet, että nämä Israel-studio-ohjelmat ovat sellaista, jota haluat jatkossakin katsoa, niin olisi aivan mahtavaa, jos voisit tukea työtämme taloudellisesti. Näet ruudussa ohjeistuksen, jonka kautta voit sitten lähettää rahalahjasi Israel-studion tuotantoon. Kiitos jälleen seurasta ja tavataan jälleen ensi viikon lauantaina kello 20. Hei hei!